We're going to hear first Reverend Dr. Munther, who is a dean in the Bible College of Bethlehem. I think it's the only Bible college in Bethlehem, if I'm not mistaken, Evangelical Bible School, College, and it is a shining light of witness in Palestine. Munther has been involved in insisting for many years that there ought to be an abiding Christian presence in the Holy Land, because as conditions stand now, there is a squeezing of Christians out of the Holy Land, so that again, the idea that for Jesus to return, we need a Palestine without, we need that Israel should be the whole space from the Mediterranean on the west to the Jordan River in the east. All of that, the vision that Israel has is a vision of Israel without Palestinians. So, but they have insisted there ought to be, at least in the birthplace of Christ, an ongoing witness that says Jesus is Lord. And so we're delighted for his courage, for his being able to bear witness, and his yet opportunities to leave Palestine. I'm sure, as all of them have, to find an easier life elsewhere, but he stayed in Palestine to continue the testimony. So let's put our hands together for our brother. He is safe. Don't be fooled by the so-called. Jesus loves everybody.
Good morning. Good morning. Let's try that again. Good morning. Good morning. That's better. So good to be here after many years of dreaming of this and months of planning. Thank you, Reverend Mons, for your introduction and for all the work, Alan, and all the committee. Thank you for all the work that you have put. The invitation for us to be here. We're so honored and privileged. And it's not simply that we have maybe similar experiences. To me, more than anything, we have a lot to learn from one another. And I think we should take this opportunity seriously and really try to say what is the Spirit telling us through one another. And I hope that this is one of the results of this gathering. So my name is Munther. I am an Arab Palestinian Christian from the town of Beit Sahur. Beit Sahur is maybe 5 minutes away from Bethlehem. You could say I'm from Bethlehem. I was born in Bethlehem. My family has been living there for almost 500 years, you know, in those areas near Bethlehem. We have a long presence. I come from an Orthodox family, where we have many priests in our history, in our family. When I was 10 years old, I began attending an evangelical church with my siblings in a summer camp, and it was there that, you know, my faith became more of about our relationship with Christ, more than just simply something we inherit. And I grew up reading the Bible, and I grew up troubled actually with the Bible. Mons mentioned something about the Philistines and connecting them with the Palestinians. Imagine reading the Bible as a Palestinian and making that connection and thinking, is God against us? And I had that struggle as a teenager, especially with the story of David and Goliath, and who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. I had a problem reading the prophets, and I used to, you know, I still remember when I was 13, 14, reading the Bible, reading the prophets. Whenever there is a judgment by the prophets on Israel, I would cheer. But then you know how the prophecies always end with restoration. I would say, why God? Don't you see what's happening here? These are the kind of struggles we have as Palestinians reading the Bible. I remember when I was 15, I wrote a paper in my school, who are God's chosen people? Simply because we grew up with these challenges. Is the Bible against us? Does the Bible really teach that God promised our land to someone else? What's wrong with us? These kind of questions. I studied civil engineering in Palestine, and it was there that my faith was tested. I realized a sense of calling. I was very involved with the students' ministry. As a student, we started a big movement that's still happening today. And at the end of my university studies in Palestine, I realized God wants me to go to ministry or to study theology. You know, you just sense a calling, and I decided to study theology. I studied in the United States for 3 years and came back to Palestine in 2005. Most of my Arab friends in the United States did not believe that I was actually going back, and they thought, you're crazy. Why don't you know, I was offered to pastor an Arab church in the United States. They actually thought that when I went to the airport to go back, they thought it was a prank. So they came ready for the prank, not ready to tell me goodbye. But I always felt that my place is home with my people, and that God wants us there. I came back in 2005 and began teaching at Bethlehem Bible College, and I have been teaching there since then. I'm now served as the academic dean, and we lead a movement there called Christ at the Checkpoint, which today's conference is inspired by that movement. And while at the Bible College, I worked on my PhD. I've been promised land theology, and I'll share a little bit about this tomorrow. And when I finished my PhD degrees, I was then recruited by the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bethlehem to join their ministry team. And right now, I'm a senior pastor of that church, Christmas Lutheran Church. So, in one sense, I am both in the academy and in the pastoral life, and I think I see the value of bringing one to the other, and I learn a lot from both and bring them into who I am today. So that's of a brief introduction of who I am right now, and I would like to share with you something about today. We thought of beginning the conference by introducing you to the Palestinian Christian community, a community that is often ignored, and many times when I introduce myself as a Palestinian Christian, people are surprised to know that we exist. However, I think it should be a surprise if we did not exist, because should I remind you that Christianity actually began in Bethlehem, right? And the first church was in Jerusalem. So really, it should be a surprise if we did not exist. There has always been a Christian presence in the Holy Land. There has always been a church in Jerusalem and in Bethlehem. And of course, over the history, our identity kept evolving, actually based on whoever occupied us, because Palestine as a country and as a region has always been occupied. That is our history. We've always lived in the shadow of empires. But before I comment on that, even as Arab Christians today, Arab Christianity itself is not a new phenomenon. You know, many times when people hear the word Arab, they link it immediately to what? To Islam, right? Even though Arab Christianity is older than Islam. And there has always been an Arab Christian presence, maybe as old as the 2nd century. There has always been an Arab Christian theology. In other words, we are not a new phenomenon. You know, I find it interesting that all of a sudden now the world is paying attention to the struggles of Arab Christians because of the tensions in the Middle East and the persecution that some or many Christians are facing. And I say that, you know, Christians in the West who couldn't care less about Arab Middle Eastern Christians in the past, now that we serve their political agenda because they are in battle with Islam, all of a sudden we become their heroes and they want to talk to us. I think this is really interesting to pay attention to in general. I mentioned something about Palestine being always occupied, and this is just a list of all the empires, if you wish, that occupied us. In other words, the people of Palestine, from biblical times maybe, never ruled themselves. And this is important to keep in mind when you think of the fact that Jesus came to our land to promote a kingdom. It could have only been here in the midst of competing empire that Jesus could preach a kingdom that challenges all these notions of power and domination, and so on. So I don't want this today to be a list of history or a lesson of history, other than to say that we have survived one brutal rule after the other. If you think of the difficulty of the Ottoman Empire for 400 years, then the British mandate, now at least part, with under Israeli military occupation. We will talk about the history and how we got here, but just to say that Palestine today as a country, or Palestine and Israel, is divided between these two portions. We have the land which is in yellow, which was occupied in 1948. The yellow portion is what was occupied in 1948. This is when Israel was created, on the yellow portion, when the Zionist movement and the Jews who immigrated from Europe conquered the Arabs and declared. Lutheran pastor Munther, who was also a Christmas Lutheran where I pastor, says, "My identity was stamped by the fact that I was born in this particular place." He was born in Bethlehem. I feel I have something like a special relationship to David and to Christ. A relationship developed not only by way of the Bible, not only through faith, but also by way of land. I share my city and my land with David and Jesus. My self-understanding as a Christian Palestinian has a territorial dimension. And with that comes a sense of weight, feeling that we have to continue that Christian presence in this land. Yet sadly, as I mentioned, today our numbers are very small. In all over the land, in Palestine and Israel, if you wish, in the Holy Land, we are around 180,000 Palestinian Christians. On the one side, on the Israeli side, we have around 135 Palestinian Christians who hold an Israeli citizenship. Those are the ones who survived the war in 1948. In other words, these are the ones who did not become refugees. They lived under military rule for 20 years in their towns and later were granted an Israeli citizenship, but their situation there is that of second-class citizens in their own homeland. Maybe their situation is better than the situation of us who live in the West Bank, in Bethlehem and Ramallah, yet it is not still a perfect situation. They don't have full equality. On our side of the wall, in the West Bank, where Bethlehem is, there is 45,000 Palestinian Christians, and we have a dual reality. By that I mean we have a Palestinian government, or a Palestinian national authority, but we have the Israeli military. So everything is controlled and defined by Israel. We only have a government inside our cities that governs our cities, that is in charge of schools, health, education, culture, and so on. But in reality, Israel is in charge of everything. And just to give you an idea of the decline in number, from 1917, when we were 17% of the population, into 8% 1945, then when Israel was created in 1948, because of the big number of refugees, we became just 2.8%, and today a good estimate, maybe we are less than 2% of the population. It is really a serious struggle for survival that we are going through today, and it's that because of that we come and say that the situation is urgent. It's not just that, we're trying to draw attention into something. No, we're talking about a very urgent situation. The majority are what we call Orthodox Christians and Catholics, I would say. there is between Orthodox and Catholics make between 90 to 92% of the total Christian population, and then the Orthodox and the Protestant and evangelical community make around 8% of the total population of Palestinian Christians. In terms of the struggles we face as a community today, we face many challenges. Challenges that have to do with our churches, but then the biggest two challenges are challenges that have to do with the political and economical reality, some social religious challenges, and maybe a big reason why we are here. I wouldn't just say Western Christian attitudes, but Christian attitudes that are shaped by Western positions on the conflict today, which pose a very, very serious threat even to our existence in the land today. So in the next few minutes, I will share about these challenges briefly, hoping to introduce the conflict and to also say why is it, how has the church been part of the problem in this situation, not part of the solution. I mentioned about Christians who live on the Israeli side. There is about 1.2 million Palestinians who live on the Israeli side, who hold the Israeli passport or citizenship. But just to give you an idea, because some people say, well, look, Israel is treating them, they're giving them their citizens and so on. This is a state as a Jewish state. And I want you to think now, because we talked about the similarities, but look at this from the Israeli nation-state law, which was passed this year by the Israeli government, a law that says the right to exercise national self-determination in the state of Israel is unique to the Jewish people. Imagine that this is a country that is promoted as the only democracy in the Middle East for the Jewish people. Yes, you can vote, but you really don't have all the full rights like a Jew would have. There are other ways in which Palestinians who live in Israel are discriminated against. And remember, we're not even talking about those who live under the military occupation. The current Israeli Prime Minister recently said Israel is a state only of the Jewish people. And you think, but what about the millions of Palestinians who have been living there for thousands of years? All of a sudden, we become, as I said, second-class citizens at best in our own homeland. Us who live in the West Bank, we have a Palestinian government, but our reality is defined by the Israeli military occupation. The occupation really controls everything. Most of the West Bank is under the military occupation, and most of the West Bank is what is called Area C, and in Area C we cannot even build. We have crowded cities, and as you see, are almost always surrounded by the settlements or the wall, by the settlements. But everything, a wall is built on Palestinian land, and when I say it's built on Palestinian land, I'm not talking about that we say this is ours, they say this is ours. No, I'm talking about land oftentimes confiscated from Palestinian families and owned families. They take them either to build the settlements, they confiscate them by force, or the water resources, and really there are two realities on the ground, especially the settlers, and laws that apply for or on the Palestinians. Checkpoint. Sounds familiar, right? On average, by the way, an Israeli person uses between 4 to 5 times more water than a Palestinian. They take the water from the West Bank, then they sell it back to us. We pay much more for water than they do, and still we have to store water and use it economically, because sometimes we don't have running water in our homes for up to 4 weeks or 5 weeks. And then we look from our windows to the Jewish settlement. They have green areas. I talked about the water, but then I talk about land confiscation. I wish we had time. We can talk about the, I said that Israel controls even the borders. Today, we can talk about the millions of Palestinian refugees who cannot come in and return to their homeland. And we're seeing one family after the other. We've lost 2 faculty members at the Bible College, 2 faculty members who are married to foreign spouses. We have a woman from Bethlehem who's married to an and then he has to leave, and eventually they left. And we have another who's married to a Bolivian, and they didn't give her a visa. Yet any Jewish person around the world can immigrate to our land, call it home, have more rights than us, and we ask, is this fair? I hope you begin to see when I talk about the inequality and the 2 laws on the ground. And with that inequality comes also a very different, imbalanced economical reality. And this is why people are leaving. You need to understand that. You don't have to be a genius to realize that these numbers are not a formula for coexistence. This is why we have a problem. You know what the GDP is, right? Gross domestic product. According, these numbers are according to the World Bank. From $38,000 on the Israeli side to $2,900 on the Palestinian side. Israel is not actually because you love the Jewish people. It's because you want to be blessed or you don't want to be cursed. And people who use this, and sorry to be very blunt, this is a classic case 101 of manipulation, religious manipulation. You're using the Bible to make people take a stand. Or else God will curse you. See what's happening. By the way, the verse in Genesis, it doesn't mention his descendants. And Paul interprets that same verse in Galatians to speak about the blessing of Jesus to the nations. Yet notice how we have changed this verse into an agenda for a political agenda today. How this happened is beyond my understanding. Joke about me referencing. We'll leave this question to tomorrow, because is it really so that God gave them? It's the whole idea of the myth of returning to an empty land. And Christians have pushed for and adopted reading, or in Africa, strangers and sojourners at best, but at worst, the evil Canaanites, who should be avoid what happened thousands of years ago. And I say, do you realize that you're promoting ethnic as a mandate for the day? How is this different than previous groups? I hope we can think now. Another a political movement called Christian Zionism, a movement that is investing heavily in political support to Israel, investing heavily in not millions but billions of dollars. And according to a study done not by Palestinians but by Israelis, the vast majority of this billions of dollars goes first to the settlement. Think of that, evangelical churches. And when we hear about these billions of dollars are always in the media. And today this political movement with the current American administration has become a main line or a strong known lobbying group catered for Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. In other words, we're not talking about a marginal group. We're talking about a very influential group that does, as I said, political lobbying, financial. It's because of that we need to have this conversation. And it's about time that you include our voices. What is wrong with this slogan? The land had people, right? The land had people. The Christians who use this mandate, I'm not here talking about the Zionist slogan. Not that the land had people. You know how I know? Because they occupied us. The British Empire was there. They would do a census that would tell you how many people live in each village. Yet still they spoke about our land as a land without people, because they had this later today. But the idea of a land without people is not to be taken literally, of equal worth. Yes, the land had people, but they were of complete irrelevance. They can be shifted. We can simply ask them to get in. Christians are still on the other side of the wall. Consider this article from Christianity Today, a major evangelical website in the United States, with a conversation between 2 respected evangelical leaders, John Piper and the head of Jews for Jesus, a Messianic Jew called David Brickner. They were discussing the question, do Jews have a divine right to Israel's land? And of course, if you look at the question, you will realize there is nothing to discuss because they have already called it Israel's land. I don't know what they are debating. You see this question. But then second, they're talking about divine right. Because again, what if the answer is yes, Jews have a divine right to Israel's land? Where does that leave me as a Christian, as a Palestinian? Can I say no? And if I say no, I would be saying no to who? I would be saying no to God. And notice how we go crazy when Muslims use this language, right? But we're perfectly fine applying it on Israel. But really the biggest problem with this here, I had at least with this, is what about our perspective as Palestinians? Why aren't we included in this conversation? So I actually emailed them and said, can I respond? I happen to be living in this land. I had a good case why I should do it. Talking about, I am an evangelical and I'm doing a PhD in Oxford and this conversation. Believe it or not, I was not allowed to be in that. They did not. That's the problem, and that's the issue here. Because they thought it's a typical classic case of two American theologians, let's be more frank, two white and a Messianic Jew, sitting at the comfort of their offices, discussing our land as if it's empty. Where most pilgrims don't engage with us. Today, there has all the wall. The whole idea is you divide, then you dehumanize those on the other side of the wall. Then notice how the Palestinians are portrayed in this speech. He says, we stand because your cause is our cause. Your values are our evangelical Christians have been that we have been always targeted by these attacks. All labels that has been put on apartheid. And I wonder if some of these slogans that I collected from articles, what we get instead is these labels. Because we shouldn't speak. But of course, speak. Many times we are being even silenced as Palestinian Christians. And I'm not one story after the other of Palestinian Christians being invited into churches or conferences only to have our invitations. In a Lutheran seminary 2 years ago, with the term a dialogue on the Holy Land or a conversation on the Holy Land, but there were no Palestinians present. There was only one Palestinian Christian invited, Mubarak, for a non-violence act, and his invitation, and it really explained the problem to me, because I was invited. I was still young, and they called me to say that there is presence in the conference. And in the beginning, I was a bit intrigued. I thought, I'm already famous, so wow, man, is it something? And I'll never forget what they told me. They said, oh no, they don't know you. It is because you are a Palestinian. Think for a moment what that means. It's a mission conference, but we have a problem. We ended up inviting me to that conference only to discover that they invited an Israeli Messianic Jewish pastor to balance my story. As if my story cannot stand on its own. Last year, I was invited to lead the Bible studies in a bigger mission conference for students, thousands of students, and that invitation was withdrawn. They told me in the letter, we respect your leadership and integrity, we respect your biblical scholarship, but your nationality has a big package with it that we cannot handle, and we have this. In a mission conference, I joke, it's as, we prayed, someone prayed this morning. That version, there is a footnote, with the exception of the Palestinians, unless they conform to Western Christian worldviews on Israel, it seems to us. But that's how we have been treated. Why are we being silenced? And I think these are the questions we engage with today. I will end with this and we'll continue this conversation later today and tomorrow. But I think we offer a challenge because we break the stereotype. It's much, much safer and more convenient and empowers our self-righteousness to think of the conflict as a conflict between the good and the evil, to divide the world between good and evil. With the axis of good being the Judeo-Christian tradition now, this is the alliances today. Of course, these alliances are the right, self-righteous, the liberty versus the others. The problem is here we come as Palestinian Christians, we're Palestinians but we're not Muslims, and we insist that the problem is political, that it's the occupation, and that we can get along. The problem is not that religious and Muslims cannot get along, and many people don't like this message. Many people don't like to listen to both sides of the story. It's much safer to stay on one side and criticize the other This is not the way of Jesus. And we will continue to challenge Christians around the world to think more deeply about the conflict. It cannot be simple like that. You cannot continue to ignore the fact that millions of Palestinians live on that land. Right now, most of them under military occupation. And the fact that there is a church that's struggling to survive, and that the action of the church worldwide is putting really in existence.